I sometimes feel there is this idea with art, with creativity, that you need to create your next big piece. Maybe it's your next big game, video, essay, sculpture, clay animation. It could be any sort of thing. It needs to be perfect. It needs to be the best thing since freaking sliced bread. It needs to feel that what you produce has to have the highest level of production value, or you're not going to achieve your goals. But I reject that narrative. You don't need to produce high quality work all the time. Sometimes it's okay to just produce okay stuff. Work that isn't perfect, but just okay. Or even sometimes bad. And I think we should normalize that. So in this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on creativity and why specifically being bad at something isn't so bad. So creatives, grab your diaries, easels, and favorite programming software, because we're getting so bad it's good in this essay. Let's discuss why it's okay to be mediocre at the things we may be passionate about, with obviously a focus on tabletop role-playing games. We need to set some groundwork. What exactly makes something bad? The obvious response is that it depends on you and your individual desires, wants, perspectives, and material needs. It also depends on the community, on the people at stake, and what you are working on. Bad is subjective. Therefore, you should consider the context of why you think your specific creative work, your art, or whatever have you is quote unquote bad, and what might the consequences of producing / publishing that work be. Here are 3 random examples I created to get my point across. 1. You are a student at a local university. You're attending on a full scholarship, and that scholarship requires you to maintain a 3.0 GPA in your given major. Let's assume it's biology. You know you don't want bad grades, or if you do poorly on your midterm / finals, it's going to maybe decrease your GPA below that threshold. You can get higher than just being good, of course. In fact, you know you can, since in high school, you did really well. Obviously, this is going to require days of work and time. And yes, this may mean a lot of sacrifices for extracurriculars, but you don't want to be bad. So maybe it's best to spend all of your time studying. Example number 2. You are a full-time freelance digital artist. You have an extensive project related to designing mech characters for a video game company. The company commissioned you to get this done by the end of the month, with bonus compensation depending on production quality, as well as what consumers might want in this game as testing rolls out. You have heard from other friends in your network too that this company is keen on paying those bonuses. Thus, you know to give it your all since you need the money in order to survive and pay your rent. Third example. You are creating a poetry design as part of a collaborative community project in your neighborhood. You've never written poetry before, but have prior experience writing in general since your day job is a grant writer. You really want to do your best. So, using your free time on the weekends, you spend it studying poems from your school days. In fact, you sneak time away at work to study, write, and read poetry under the guise of writing. Ultimately, your portion of the community poetry design is not due for 2 weeks, but you really want to do your best to impress others, and most certainly yourself. For the student, a bad grade could lead to them losing their scholarship at the university, which is really bad. At the same time, the student would be sacrificing weeks worth of time studying when school, especially in higher education, whether you're in undergrad, grad school, or PhD, is more than just the school aspect. They'll miss out on the extracurricular activities, work experience, and the socialization aspect that is equally as important to college. For the artist, this is their job. If the artist does a bad job or doesn't perform adequately, they cannot pay to live. They may even get some repercussions in the industry if it's particularly small. Of course, if they put in the extra work, the creative will make a nice bonus which can go to future projects and further sustainability financially. So for them, putting quality into their work and making sure that it's not bad seems important because there's a financial incentive. Now thirdly, the newbie poet situation is different. Creating a bad poem isn't the end of the world. Their career won't blow up in a show of pyrotechnics. Their career, in fact, is entirely not related to their personal hobby, which is poetry writing. Furthermore, the stake is super low. This is a community-based project with people of varying qualities, styles, and forms of writing. If the poet writes something of mediocre quality, they will not lose their grant writing job unless they start falling behind. So you can see in all of these examples, the quality of bad work and producing it has wildly different circumstances and consequences. Shoddy work is then a subjective point. Each of these people in their lives could consider what they make bad even if they put in loads of hours of effort and time. Bad work is something that is usually unintentional and subjective to the groups that are consuming said medium. With that in mind, we should not be afraid to create bad work, bad art, or even stuff that's mediocre. We have to start somewhere. On the topic of bad media and bad content, why do we enjoy this stuff? Why do we enjoy bad movies, news, media, comics, and other forms of creative and intellectual works? For some, like in McCoy and Scarborough's study, consuming bad media is more than just a matter of contempt. Rather, people might consume bad media or TV shows for 3 reasons. 1. Ironic consumption. 2. Viewing bad TV with a camp sensibility, aka the viewer admires the TV show for how bad it is. Think Schadenfreude. And 3. Bad TV as a guilty pleasure. This logic applies similarly to writers and other contemporary artists. Take for instance the Museum of Bad Art, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts, or movies like Troll 2 or The Room. John Dyke and Johnson Matt in the article Appreciating Bad Art discuss from a philosophical approach why we should appreciate bad art. For these two quote-unquote good bad art is one where audiences can attribute aesthetic virtue to a piece whose artistic values does not align with mainstream society. It is when you see an art piece and know something is strange and confusing, but you still enjoy it and have a good time nevertheless. I mentioned MOBA earlier, and MOBA, aka Museum of Bad Art, has pieces like this, the Winter Monolith. And the center of the piece is a strange white monolith that, as the description states, casts a glowing shadow on the tundra in this icy landscape. However, when you look at the piece, there's a lot that feels artistically off. I want you to take a minute and look at it. Like, seriously, just look at it. Cool? You cool? Okay. First off, the perspective seems kind of off. I'm assuming the author's intention is to create this scary atmosphere of the object in the middle of a tundra / icy landscape being what the viewer's eyes go to. However, the monolith is comparable in size to the trees that surround it. This results in it losing any sense of creepiness due to the monolith blending into the background, and it just seems kinda goofy. Furthermore, the icy mountains / glaciers in the background seem to have comparable sizes too. So what could be perceived as this unnerving, creepy, and Cthulhian-like horror setting is instead awkward and humorous since the original tension is not felt in the art. Is this bad art in the circumstances that we've described above or earlier? Yes, but that doesn't mean it's undeserving of accolades, undeserving of attention, or isn't a fun time to look at. It's just artistically, people could argue that it is bad. Simply because it is not quote-unquote fine art or the peakest form of art or tabletop role-playing game or any other medium doesn't obfuscate the art from praise and appreciation. This is to say that bad media, art, books, and other forms of expression are things we gravitate to. In the case of art, it's because we can find appreciation in its aesthetic value and the process surrounding it. For others, they will defend their favorite bad movie because they offer, as Stroll says, creative engagement and lively fan communities. Those fan communities come together to celebrate their favorite bad media or activity in an ironic, guilty pleasure sort of act. This gravitation of bad media can be seen in the AO3 Room fanfiction, folks finding enjoyment in 2010's Xbox 360's Kinect games, video essays celebrating bad games with strong fan bases like Sonic Adventure 2, and Sonic 06. It can be watching the drama-ridden Netflix specials like Jake Paul vs. Mike Tyson or Beast Games with its many controversies. In each of these respective mediums, people actively went out and watched his content despite them being considered low quality, schlocky, not fine art, or not of any particularly good quality. There were in our active communities despite the so-called badness. This is all to say that I think this extends into Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPG spaces. No person in this space starts off good or with very strong skills in any particular thing they might be interested in. You're not going to know how to run a particular game or how to GM or how to run safety tools. You are going to be bad. This is because being bad doesn't mean it won't be fun. I emphasize all of these experiences, all of this information, all of these articles, because as a tabletop RPG creative, as a game master, as someone who's been around the scene, going on around like 4 years doing this stuff, I feel sometimes that I'm a bad game master, that I'm a bad video essayist. I think I'm bad at a lot of games I run and play. And this isn't saying that I'm not a good GM. I'm not saying that I'm not a professional GM. I'm not even saying that I don't know how to run games. But I also feel that sometimes I'm not suited for the job. I'm mediocre. And there are some games that I'm just not good at running at all. For example, games like GURPS 4th Edition or Vampire the Masquerade are some of the more popular games that I struggle with. GURPS 4E's basics are simple, but wrapping my mind around tackling the intricacies of combat, specific genres, and just the endless amounts of things to consider when planning for the game is mentally exhausting and a bit of a destabilizer for me. I genuinely struggle with games that are huge tomes of lore or rules or have a lot of content to them because there's a lot to swallow. I'm not good at that. This is in contrast to games like Directionless by Junk Food Games or Oyasumi Wonderland by Brite Palette are wonderful solo RPGs. Directionless is a solo role-playing game about feeling overwhelmed and directionless in a strange and scary world. It is a game about uncovering and reveling in that unknown, and what do those feelings look like as you journal them. Oyasumi Wonderland is an exploration solo role-play game about traversing dangerous locations and crafting this awesome, epic sci-fi western similar to Trigun or Cowboy Bebop. Both games could be ran using GURPS, and in fact, I'm sure there are people who are doing that. There are supplements for GURPS Old West, GURPS Space, and plenty of additional material, as you can see here, to cover a wide range of themes. In terms of even easing that process even more, there are plenty of awesome creatives like Chris Norman who have graciously created video libraries describing how to play and run GURPS. However, when you compare it to barriers to entry, I would argue that solo role-playing games like the ones I mentioned earlier are just easier to jump into compared to, say, a huge tome that is GURPS character and campaign books. Does that mean that I am a terrible GM who's undeserving of running any games? No, but that does mean I have skills suited to particular scenarios, and that honestly, I feel bad that I can't run it the way I want or play this game in a way that makes me feel competent. Vampire the Masquerade holds the problem of making me feel confused and unsure due to its extensive lore. Anytime I try to parse getting into the game, I'm met with so many variations of games and details on each of the vampire clans, and also the many other games set in the same universe. From an outlier who is used to Dungeons and Dragons Call of Cthulhu, that is intimidating. Think of it like this. I'm very familiar with playing and running games like Liminal Horror or Mothership, which don't require a vast amount of lore. Now, I'm sure some would say you don't need to know the lore or you don't need to know every rule. You are 100% correct. I don't know every rule to Call of Cthulhu. I don't know every rule to Liminal Horror. I don't know every rule to any and every game I have ever ran. You don't need to know everything. And I'm not saying you should. What I am saying is that these barriers and difficulties can lead to negative feelings like self-doubt, grief, and downplaying your abilities. Every time you start trying to run a game or play, you feel dumb. And that's how I felt. That's how I sometimes feel. I feel unsure. nervous, confused, and if I'm running this game for new people in a social setting that's not online, that feeling rises in my chest like a strong beating heartbeat. You feel like a bad game master, player, participant, reviewer, whatever you want to call yourself. I say this with all of my heart, not only to myself, but to you. Create bad stuff anyway. Create bad tabletop games. Create bad videos, bad essays, bad art. I want you to mess up and put out something even if it doesn't feel perfect. Now, I'm not saying you should create something bad and make irresponsible decisions. I don't recommend putting yourself into financial, emotional, or physical ruin by submitting bad or incomplete work. I also am not advocating for you to make something extremely offensive so you can piss off as many people as possible. No, that's just corny. What I am saying is make art that you feel passionate about, that you care about, and that is obviously not going to put you in financial or extreme ruin. This is all to say bad art is part of the process. Let go of your inhibitions of always wanting such needing an excuse to create a perfect product. You have to start from somewhere, and bad work, art, media, stories, and role-playing experience come from your passions and interests, even if they come from a faulty area. By creating something bad or unfinished or not fully polished, you become a better creative. You start to stratify and figure out what you like and don't like. You start to figure out the ways you go about organizing your artistic skills. You learn a lot of other skills along the way. You develop community and patterns and ideas that you never thought you could if you didn't start. You have to start somewhere. And if you just say, oh, I'm bad at this, I'm never going to try it again, then you're never going to see the end. What good is it just twiddling your fingers, twiddling your thumbs by yourself, catastrophizing about how bad you are when you aren't going to improve, you don't even take a chance. So take it. Bad, good, and all. I am just trying to make something that is fun, enjoyable, and brings value, genuine value in a world that is bleak and dark and scary. And if it weren't for the bad GMing, the bad role-playing, some of the terrible advice I may have picked up on, I wouldn't be here. If it weren't for all the mistakes and frustrations and confusions, I wouldn't be who I am right now. If it weren't for the bad, I wouldn't have the good. If it weren't for me taking leaps to work with others and improve, all I would be is just some mediocre or bad creative. One who never changes and who never wants to deviate from anything. And I think that's bad. I think that's a genuinely bad thing to do. Not in the sense of, the topic of the video, but in the sense of it's stifling yourself. And I think Rise Up Comments summarizes my feelings on this so well. RPGs are a form of art that is welcoming to people of every skill level. But my map is bad. But my dungeon is kind of boring. Wrong. We're not talking about putting out albums. We're talking about singing around a campfire for a friend who has a guitar. Fun is the focus, not production quality. And that's why I think you should create bad tabletop RPG stuff. It's going to be bad. It's going to be mediocre. It's going to be not good. It's going to suck the first time, the second time, and it's probably going to suck even when you do feel comfortable in your own skin in the hobby. But you won't know until you try. And even after you try, there'll be a table full of people waiting to cheer you on, hopefully. And if not, well, you can always check out this video if you want to improve your skills in GMing and maybe learn a thing or two. In fact, why don't you let me know down below in the comment section your thoughts on this video and the idea of just being bad at the things you care about, especially if they're your hobby. So let me know. And last but not least, special shout out to my Patreon supporters, Harrison Parker and Paul Volpe for your continued support. You too can support me over at patreon.com/LordDisposition over here, as well as give me a one-time donation over here from coffee.com. And as always, I'm your average everyday queer, bad Dungeon Master player, and TTRPG enjoyer. Blurry disposition up, y'all. Have an awesome day. Ciao!